Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here, former federal prosecutor, former Army JAG. I want to take a few minutes to sort of talk with you the way I would talk with my juries. And I always said that the best way to talk to a jury is as if you're just talking with your friends and your family around your kitchen table. So let me take a few minutes to talk about how Donald Trump has been weaponizing our courts. So Donald Trump learned long ago that even if you don't have a good legal case, and even if you don't have a good legal defense, you can delay, you can wear the other side down, and you can run out the clock. And that is what we have seen Donald Trump do, and he's done it quite effectively, and he's sort of done it with the passive complicity of the courts. That's not to criticize the courts, because I think they're doing the best they can to keep up. But here's what I mean by Donald Trump weaponizing the courts. So Don McGahn, former White House counsel, we learned, courtesy of the Mueller report, was told by Donald Trump to fire Bob Mueller, special counsel. Don McGahn said, not going to do it. It could be viewed as obstructing justice. So Donald Trump then said, okay, if you won't fire him, I want you to lie about the fact that I told you to fire him, and I want you to create some false records, some false documents to cover up the fact that I told you to fire him. That's a big deal. That is the President of the United States committing the felony offense of obstructing justice. Plain and simple. You don't need to be a career prosecutor to realize that. So understandably, Congress wanted to get a hold of that truthful information from Don McGahn. So what do? They issue him a subpoena. So Don McGahn, obviously in consultation with Donald Trump and his lawyers, decides he's not complying with that subpoena. He's not testifying. He's not giving up the president. He's not telling Congress or the American people about Donald Trump's attempts to obstruct justice. Instead, he's going to claim something called absolute immunity. Absolute immunity, meaning your subpoena is no good here, Congress. I don't have to testify, and you can't make me. I have absolute immunity against testifying. Well, he doesn't. There's no lawful claim that he could invoke that he has absolute immunity. In fact, a few times the courts have wrestled with that issue. They have said, yeah, no such thing. Doesn't matter. That was the litigation position. So when the House of Representatives went to court to try to enforce the subpoena against Don McGahn, Don McGahn, as supported by Trump and the Department of Justice, started litigating the issue, claiming absolute immunity. And that took months and months and months, because every time you're in court, you have to brief the issue up. You have to set the issue for oral argument. You have to argue the issue. You may have to have evidentiary hearings, in fact, to flesh out the record. You have to wait for the district court, the first level court, the trial court to issue an opinion to decide the case. Then what happens? You file an appeal. Now, it could be an entirely frivolous appeal. You could have no legal argument saying that the trial court, the district court, got the ruling wrong, but you're going to file an appeal anyway. Why? Because that means more delay. More briefs need to be scheduled and authored and filed. More oral arguments need to be scheduled. The court needs to take more time to decide these issues. And months and months and months go by. The appellate court might say, you know what? The district court was right. No such thing as absolute immunity. So what do you do then? More appeals, more briefs, more arguments, more delays, more waiting. And all the while, the clock is running. The Don McGahn litigation has been going on for, it's coming up on a year now, and there is no end in sight. I think at this stage we're still waiting for a decision from the appellate court, the circuit court, before That gets decided, then that gets appealed to the Supreme Court, and the waiting continues. And now we're probably well beyond the 2020 election. So Donald Trump in court loses and loses and loses. And by losing, he wins because he runs out the clock. He weaponizes the process. We know this. We know this is his game. We know he has no legitimate arguments to make in court most of the time. But delay is his friend, and delay is the enemy of justice. So because we know this is Donald Trump's MO, and frankly, Don McGahn has been taking advantage of it because Congress never was able to get his testimony about Donald Trump's obstruction of justice. They couldn't even get it in time for an impeachment hearing, which is just ludicrous. So now that we know that's what Donald Trump does, he weaponizes the process, we need to address it. We need to fix it. And there is a fix that we can put in place. Courts all across the country have specialized courts, specialized dockets, specialized judges. Basically, specialized assignments such that there are domestic violence courts, there are mental health courts, there are drug courts, there are landlord-tenant courts. Those are some of the local and state courts. In federal courts, there are tax courts and bankruptcy courts and immigration courts and FISA courts, which we've all heard so much about recently. There's reentry court run by Judge Reggie Walton in the District of Columbia. He handles all reentry cases after inmates serve their sentence and they're on supervised release, which is kind of like parole or probation, and they need help successfully re-entering society. Judge Reggie Walton, the federal district court judge in D.C., handles reentry court. There are specialized courts, specialized judges, specialized assignments within courts to help address the nature of the cases that are brought before that court. There needs to be, and this is imminently doable, an interbranch dispute court, IBDC, let's call it. An interbranch dispute court, so that when two branches of government are fighting, when the executive branch is fighting Congress, and it's something that needs to be dealt with right away, the interbranch dispute court can put it on an accelerated track. The interbranch dispute court can prevent Donald Trump from weaponizing the process, running out the clock, and basically stonewalling justice and fairness and the rule of law. And what the interbranch dispute court could do very easily, this is doable. They can stand up a court. They can stand up a special judicial assignment in the DC Federal District Court that just handles these interbranch governmental disputes. So if Congress needs to subpoena somebody for important oversight hearings to take testimony, or for impeachment hearings, and the person being subpoenaed, the executive branch official says, I ain't doing it, I ain't complying, I've got some magical absolute immunity, the interbranch dispute court can simply say, fine, 72 hours, I want your brief filed. Another 72 after that, we'll hear your argument. Another 72 after that, we'll issue our decision. 9 days, less than 2 weeks. And the same schedule can apply to the circuit court once that decision is appealed. 72 hours, 72 hours, 72 hours, you'll have our decision. And then the Supreme Court will need to fall in line. For gosh sakes, do a little bit of justice, folks. Please fall in line with the expedited track. I mean, you think back to 1974 in the litigation over the Nixon tapes. The subpoena for the Nixon tapes was litigated, and the litigation commenced, I believe, in April of 1974, and the Supreme Court ruled by July of 1974. Now, that was a different time. Litigation has become much more weaponized now, but it's still doable. And all the court has to do is set up an interbranch dispute court within the federal court for the District of Columbia, imminently doable, and stop Donald Trump from weaponizing the process, diffuse his weaponization of the courts and the criminal justice system. Because, for gosh sakes, the American people deserve some justice and some fairness and some decency and some resolution of these issues in time to get to the polls and vote in a fully informed fashion in November. Thank you, folks, and I look forward to seeing you soon for another legal update.